Welcome back. I'm Connie Sokol, your host of Call to Create, and it is pure joy to have our guest here today, Jason Hewlett. Jason, welcome.
How are you, Connie? Oh my
I'm
gosh, I love it. We get to hang out. This is the best.
It takes us getting together on a podcast. I was at the NSA meeting. I was telling him before we started last night. You can't hardly get to him for all the people thronging him. But anyway, it's like now we get to meet across Zoom, and that's how we can connect.
It's
I'm
awesome.
so thrilled to have you here. And for those of you who have been living in a cave and may not know much about Jason Hewlett, let me give you the official bio, and then I'm going to add a few thoughts of my own. Having delivered thousands of presentations over 2 decades, Jason Hewlett is the only speaker in the world teaching leadership in a performance of uncanny musical and comedy impressions, utilizing the legends of stage. The promise is a keynote speech that feels like a show with proven processes and immediately implementable takeaways to transform your business and leadership skills. Jason is also one of the youngest inductees into the prestigious Speaker Hall of Fame, and he has performed over 2,000 presentations for Fortune 500 companies and clients such as American Express, Delta Airlines, the Salt Lake Olympics, Experian, Coca-Cola, and Wells Fargo. And on a personal note, his hobbies include hiking in the mountains, writing music, and staring at his wife. And his greatest accomplishments all live within the walls of his home. He is the husband to the most beautiful woman in the world, Tammy, who is a doll, and dad to 4 incredible young children who serve as his inspiration and help deliver material for his presentations. We're so happy to have you here today. So let's just jump right in, Jason. So this is so unusual, this sort of Vegas style keynote that teaches business principles and it works. When did you really first feel you had this calling or start to see that you could make people laugh and still teach a message?
Well, that's a great question. I believe that I saw this was a possibility as a child. When I was in 3rd grade, people were already laughing, and I was up at the front of the classroom where the teacher said, if you can't be quiet for the day, then you need to, you'll be rewarded if you're quiet with a performance at the end. And so it took me a while until I got to stand on stage in front of my classmates, stage meaning the front of the class, and do music and impressions and noises and voices and things I'd been working on, like Mickey and Donald and Goofy. Oh boy, hi everybody, Mickey Mouse here, and then I'm like, oh, you're good, Mickey. Where's Donald? And everybody would laugh, and I'd think, oh, this is kind of interesting, but it never really occurred to me that that could be a way to make a living until I was on my mission in Brazil. And while I was in Brazil, I realized people like to laugh in any language, and you can do anything with your face and your voice and your energy. And then the next thing I know, people are laughing in a different language at what I was doing just with my face, my body, my physicality, my ability to mimic and so forth. And when I got home as a 21-year-old, I had full ride scholarships to BYU before I left. And when I got home, I went, I think I'm going to go to Vegas instead. And so I put together my one-man show of music and comedy and went to Las Vegas and landed a really big opportunity at the Legends in Concert, which was owned by a guy named John Stewart, who is an LDS, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he said, "You're a kid from Utah, huh? You Mormon?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, we need some, good people in here with us." So he hired me as a impersonator of both Ricky Martin and Elton John. And so I would dress up as these guys, sing as them, and I became a performer for Legends. That changed my whole life path, to say, wow, I can make it on stage. I can make a career of this. And so that's really how this began. And eventually, over the years of performing and making people smile and laugh, I realized I could also inspire them without it being an inappropriate show of music and comedy. I could do some leadership training. I could talk about family. I could do some extra things that would make people happy. And so that's how my career's gotten to where I am, is just saying, having people along the way that helped me, and also just being courageous enough to say, I'm not going to go the regular route. I'm going to go for it. And through Vegas, I went, and here we are.
That is crazy. And the courage that it takes to do that. Were your parents giving you an eye, like, son, get a 9-to-5 job, be stable? Did you get any of that?
My parents are pretty amazing in that sense. They realized early on, I was probably 11 or 12 when I was almost failing out of school. And my dad sat down on the bed one day and he had a stack of books. And he said, I know you can't really read, but you need to try to figure out how to read these books. And there were books like As a Man Thinketh and How to Win Friends and Influence People, The Power of Positive Thinking. And all of these books, he said, if you can figure these out, yeah, this is really all you need. And he said, if you go to college or not, we don't care. We just want to support you in whatever you need to do. And eventually I had to go to a private school, which really changed my life. That's where the real people came out of the woodwork and discovered I had great gifts. But I was held back in ninth grade. So I did ninth grade twice and
Got it right.
my
Yeah.
first encore. But I found that, yeah, I didn't have gifts at school at all, but I had gifts making people smile, doing things other people couldn't, working hard at one thing and then becoming good at it. Eventually I became the student body president of the school. I eventually became a honor roll student, just through hard work and tenacity, even though I didn't have the brain power for those school things. And that really, really was what helped me get there. So my parents were really big drivers in that and said, hey, you know what? We're not going to medicate this kid as much as he needs it. We're going to just keep the creative juices flowing and do our best to keep him on track. And there's ultimately my greatest supporters of my life. I'm so thankful for parents that raised me, not only in that sense, but also in the gospel, to say, this is the foundation of what we believe, what we do. And I not only bought into that, I believe it and live it still.
That is fantastic. Let's go to the Las Vegas experience. So you're in Vegas. I mean, that is its own planet, right? So you're there and you had some amazing opportunities. How did you navigate that? You're young, you're fairly young. How did you navigate that? And what kind of experiences did you have that kind of set the precedence? I know there were some challenges to your values. What were some of those experiences that you really had to set that tone in concrete and say, no, this is this and that is that?
Well, in reality, they hired me in Vegas, but then they sent me off into distant lands in Myrtle Beach and Philadelphia and different shows that toured around the country. So that was an interesting thing because I thought I'd be on the strip in Vegas right away, and that wasn't the case. So I did get to leave Vegas, which it's a cool place. But when I went to these show places around the country, I realized really quickly that I had to establish within the dressing room who I am, because there was a lot going on there. In fact, showing up as a newlywed right after getting married in the temple to my beautiful bride, a week later, I was doing my first job in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina at the Legends in Concert show in Surfside. And there's a 1,000-seat theater. It's a very popular tourist attraction. And I'd be sitting there with guys looking at all kinds of magazines. This is before cell phones and stuff like that. Back in the early 2000s, they had all kinds of, drinks and drugs and whatever else around us. And I remember thinking, here I am pretty much fresh off a mission, fresh out of being married in the temple. My wife and I are newlyweds, and I'm sitting here going, what is this? I remember thinking, if this is what my career is going to be, I don't want this. I don't want to have to sift through this. There's got to be a better way. Although the career I was starting was really the pinnacle for somebody in my position. And so it was wild to get to start there. But that allowed me to establish some interesting stuff, because these performers that were grizzled and old and sick of life and frustrated at 35, they were like, hey, do you want some of this stuff? And they found out I'm from Utah, and then they made fun of me and they realized I didn't do any of that stuff. And then eventually I said, hey, you know what we ought to do? We should say a prayer before we go out and perform. And they're like, what? And I was like, yeah, we should pray, like on those documentaries where everybody goes out before the show and they hold hands in a circle. They're like, what are you talking about? And the impersonators, he was with the group The Temptations, which they were impersonating. It was awesome. And he was this Baptist guy, and he's like, I've been waiting for somebody to say that. Let's say a prayer, man. And so he gathered all the showgirls. They put their towels around him, and we came over in the dressing room and we held hands with Elvis Presley impersonator, the Blues Brothers, Shania Twain, Whitney Houston, all these people impersonating other people. And I led them in a prayer, and we did that every day that I was there. I really feel that it set the tone for what I wanted out of my career. And it shifted the way that people looked at me and the way they talked around me. And I don't think that that was a self-righteous move. I think it was like I need to establish who I am and what makes me unique here. And it was really the foundational moment, I'd say, in my career to say, I'm going to turn away opportunities that come along, which eventually they did. And I'm going to stick to my values, which are more important to me.
That is so fantastic. And I think in any industry, and for our listeners, whatever it might be, musicians and artists, there are those switch point moments where you really have to determine yes or no. And what does that look like for me? And start as you mean to go on. And I love that you set that precedent. So it made it probably easier going into any other situations. You just already had that in place. So take us to this evolution of you're going to be a headliner, but then you kind of have to choose, is this exactly how I want to go? And how did this lead up to the promise? Like, take us to that evolution of how you got to your actual signature keynote from where you were.
Well, I was the impersonator in this show as Elton John, and then I'd come back out on stage a couple characters after me as Ricky Martin. And so that was a fun gig, but eventually I had to leave because I do all these other characters. I could do Billy Joel and Louis Armstrong and the Bee Gees and Justin Timberlake and Lady Gaga and all these funny things that I do. I make them family friendly. And so I put together a one-man show of about 100 musical impressions where I would just blast in and out of each voice over and over. I'd be like the Chipmunks, Christmas, Christmas time is near. Then I switched to, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world, and then I'm doing, well, yeah, da, 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 stay alive. So I'm doing all these voices and doing corporate events. Eventually I started getting opportunities in Las Vegas to be a one-man show. And the guy that I'd patterned everything after was a guy named Danny Gans. He was a wonderful Christian man. He had signed a $150 million contract to be a headliner there. And he was the best entertainer I'd ever seen. So I patterned my show after him. And mine was extremely G-rated, where his was, kind of PG-13, but it's still great. And I remember when the people that brought Danny Gans to Las Vegas, they came to me and said, "You're next." And I was 25. And they said, "You're the next big thing here. We want you to be a headliner at our casino. And we're going to put you on a career path where all you have to do is sign the dotted line. And we're going to manage your career. We're going to change what you're doing because what you're doing, it needs to be upgraded. But it also needs to fit our audience." And this was in 2004, Connie. And so the new theme in Vegas from the 90s of family friendly Vegas was 2004 was what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, a brand new theme. And so they needed me to shift things a bit. And I had made a promise to myself, my family, that I would not change what I was working on and that the performance would remain as I wanted it to. And the people that had, engaged with me to have this opportunity, they said, "You have to change everything. And in fact, you're not going to have time to speak at schools and perform for all of these church things. You'll be with us and we'll be managing everything you do."
They will own you.
Yeah. So to walk away from that was a real, a tough experience because I had no other prospects outside of just working towards this one goal of headlining there. And when we walked away, my wife and I made a conscious choice and said, the legacy we want to create is something greater than just receiving this opportunity now. There's got to be something more. And so we left. And that was crazy to the people that we told. And we didn't tell very many people. We just kind of went about our business, moved back to Utah, built a home in Daybreak, which was brand new in South Jordan, a new place in 2004 and 5. And built our life here in Utah. Corporations began hiring me as a one-man show. And eventually corporations enjoyed it so much they'd bring me back over and over because it was a standing ovation, Las Vegas quality, Utah friendly show. And eventually they said, "You're also teaching leadership while you're performing because there are things you're saying that we weren't expecting." And so, Connie, eventually my message became signature moves, how to discover, what makes you different in this world. I say how to stand out in a sit down world. And so I eventually wrote a book on that and then started talking about how every person has a signature move. And then I would share how I do the signature moves of other people, the Michael Jackson moonwalk, what's your moonwalk, kind of a story. And then eventually it became the promise. And the reason it became the promise is because I believe that we've all been gifted something great from heaven. And in Matthew 25, he talks about the parable of the talents. I believe we all have those talents given to us, and we can either multiply them or bury them. And if we're willing to multiply them, he'll give us even more gifts. And so as the promise came about, I realized, you know what? Every one of us has a promise to make, to share those gifts. And if we don't, we're breaking a promise that's an eternal promise, I feel. We need to discover those in this life. And if we do, and we don't share them, we're breaking a massive promise to our Heavenly Father. And so that's where the message has come about. It was first a spiritual thought, and now it's a wonderful thing for corporations that bring me in as a leadership speaker. And they say, I like to say, why set a goal when you can make a promise? And it's not to say goals aren't important, but if you make a promise and you break it, that's a one and done. So it's a powerful message.
It is so fantastic. And we can get so short-sighted without thinking the Lord has something more in mind, that if we'll adhere to those values and just trust that he'll make the way, we just keep taking the next right step, that there'll be so much more for us. And look at what you're doing. I talk a lot about fingerprint and finding your unique way, your unique fingerprint on what you're doing. And look at, you're able to have this amalgamation of being able to sing and do comedy and do leadership. I mean, who would have guessed that? I absolutely love that you found this niche, but it took time. I remember you sharing a while back that, I think, was it a year or 2 years that you worked on your material, and it was just not doing a lot of gigs, but you were just working on this material, and it was kind of in faith. Can you take us to that moment?
Oh, certainly. I mean, for years, I relied on the one-man show of comedy and music, and I became quite well known in Utah and the surrounding states for that show, because I was the answer for a corporation that needed Las Vegas quality entertainment without paying for it, but they needed it to be, family friendly for their event. And so I became very well known for that. I used to sell out amphitheaters around Utah and Vegas and Idaho. It was cool. And then eventually, as people said, you're a leadership speaker, I always wanted to eventually be known as a person who speaks, but is also entertaining. And so I'll tell you, Connie, when you're so good at one thing, and then you say, I'm going to make a big shift, a lot of people don't want that.
Yes.
Just like if we use a Hollywood example of Jim Carrey, who's one of my favorites, when he did all his funny stuff for the movies in the 90s, and then he said, I'm going to shift into drama, a lot of people didn't like that. However, now as we look back, we realize what a genius actor he is in any genre. And, people have made that shift, like Tom Hanks and Robin Williams and others in that world. But the only reason I'm sharing those examples is because my clients didn't come along with me, not very many of them, when I became the speaker who was entertaining. They just wanted the entertainer who had, a little bit of positivity and a little message at the end. And so as a speaker, that was a brand new career. I had to start from scratch. Nobody wanted it. Nobody would hire me for it. And eventually I got a client here and a client there, and I built it up from scratch. And so what's interesting to me is that here I am, a guy that doesn't have a college degree. I never did make it to college. I mean, I went for a few weeks and was like, I got to go to Vegas, and now I'm speaking, which I find fascinating. I'm hired by superintendents to come and speak to all the teachers and all the administrators about how best to teach and lead. And I think if we discover that which we're meant to do and be, that there's value in that, way more than any kind of degree could give you or certify you. And so if we find out what God has meant for us, I believe there's a river we're all supposed to be in, that current. And there are little tributaries and streams off to the side we can get taken down. But it's important to find your way back to the middle of the river. I know I'm in it. I'm in that spot, that sweet spot, where I can now go in and speak, entertain, run some things if they need a judge or a panel or an MC or a breakout session. We can do all those types of things. I can counsel and coach and mentor, having a career over 20 plus years doing this, running my own business, etc. It's been cool. But I think that as I've morphed into that and created a new career for myself, it's been a miracle that Heavenly Father sent us the blessings we have. And there's a lot of people, as you know, Connie, that are professional speakers and entertainers that don't do much on the charity side. And they might even pride themselves and say, I never speak for free, And I have a different philosophy. Mine is, for each full fee that I get, I'm going to do one free for somebody who needs it. And so I believe with that pattern of always saying, I will give, and then eventually I'll always get. It's the principle that is a real one, that is an eternal principle. And it's not necessarily giving to get, it's giving because we love giving. And that's part of
the
the
Tom Shoes principle of speaking right there. I love it. I love it. This is so powerful. And again, I can't help but keep hearing this unintentional theme of doing it the Lord's way. It makes me think of 1 Nephi 18:2, where you build the ship after the manner that he invites you to construct. And he may not give you every single thing to do and every single board and nail, but he's going to give you that vision and that feel. And as you follow that, he'll start to unfold that vision in more clarity as you go. And it's such a beautiful example of this. And I want to lead in a little bit to your family, because you talked about service and you do an incredible amount of service and helping so many people to be able to get into their speaking career and doing what they do and helping them to do it better. But your beautiful family, you've mentioned that your kids are a great source of material. And I was just curious, I think most comedians and most speakers that really have a meaningful message have found that same thing. Those closest to them provide so much of that meaningful content. Can you think of a bit or a message that maybe one of your kids have inspired?
Oh man. I mean, I can talk for days about that for sure. But so after I did my one-man show of all my impressions, eventually a lot of the clients that wanted me to come back would say, do you have any new material? And I eventually I said, I've got to create something else, because I was doing highlights of artists from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and they wanted something else. And so I put together a show called Father Time. And Father Time is about being a dad. I would do my daddy dinosaur, and I would talk about commitment within the bit. So it's a kind of a cool motivational piece mixed with being a funny guy. But when my kids were little, they would say, Daddy, do the dinosaur. And I'd be like, well, you don't want to see the dinosaur I can do. It's a little bit too much, So some dads, they just kind of go halfway and they're like, but I'm like, if you ask me, I'm going to go 100%. That's a promise I made that I'm going to do that. So then they'd be like, do it, Daddy. And I'd say, that's the Velociraptor from Jurassic Park. And I'd open my eyes and open my mouth. And they're like, no, Daddy, no. And I'm like, chasing them around. So I did this whole comedy bit about this, and I became known as this daddy dinosaur and people can't even remember that it's a Velociraptor. They're like, do the pterodactyl thing. And I'm like, I don't fly, but like I do this raptor thing. And now my kids are, they're not 2, 3, and 4 anymore that wanted that when I wrote it. They're now
17 to 11.
17, yeah. I mean, now I do the bit where my daughter, she got asked to prom last spring, and the guy shows up, Luke. He's 6'4", big, handsome, buff guy. I'm like, hey, what's your name? He's like, Luke. I'm like, hey, Luke, what time are you bringing my daughter home? I don't know, 1 or 2. And I'm like, no, and he's like, oh, I'll bring her home at 10. And my daughter's like, stop, Dad, stop. So now I'm chasing him down the street in the car. They're looking in the rearview mirror. I'm like, so as a dad, there's an unlimited amount of material, whether the kids are 3 years old or now they're 17 and they're driving. And I mean, things are crazy with what shifts and what happens, but I'll tell you, they don't want to see that stuff, but it's funny to place them in that position to be like, okay, this is a funny bit that I can share. Obviously it might cost me a lot in therapy bills, but it's
but it's all for the cause. It's good.
It's a greater cause.
Love it. And it's such a family enterprise. You are so close to your family, and it's your family is so involved. There is no parallel track here. So I want to do a little surprise, a little something fun, and I want to do a little game called What My Wife Said About Me. So I emailed your wife a couple of questions, and I want to
What?
see how you answer the question and then share how she answered the question. Are you game?
So I'm answering how I would answer or how she
What
would.
you think she would say.
Okay.
All right. So this is for the washer. All right, here we go. All right. What did you think about Jason wanting to pursue this career? 450 points. What do you think she said?
I think she said she thought it was unbelievably awesome.
You are spot on. She said, I supported him 100%. I knew how talented he was and was confident he could find his niche and make a living at it.
She was totally that way, Connie. That's exactly how she was. And I told her up front, I said, this is what I'm doing. And she was like, because she was older and she, a little bit older than me, a few years, and she had only dated established men that had real jobs, had gone to
A
college,
briefcase.
had a briefcase and a tie, while I'm in the basement working on Mickey Mouse. And I said, I am doing this. And she's like, I got you. And she did. She supported us at the beginning of the career while I was just going job to job trying to find gigs. She was a stockbroker, very, very savvy, so smart. She's amazing. So that's a great one. That's funny. Thank you for asking.
I love that. All right. And then I said, what's something you would love to share about Jason that people wouldn't necessarily know? What do you think she said?
That's interesting. Probably that I write really wonderful letters to her. I don't know.
That's so sweet. Well, that's a bonus then. We didn't know that. She said he's actually an introvert, believe it or not. Is that true?
Yeah, that's totally true. And I've learned to extroversion myself in order to survive in this business, but I'm certainly fully introverted.
Isn't it shocking though? I think there's a lot of speakers, and that's a tendency I have too, that are introverted, that we can be cheetahs in the burst and being able to share. And then I need to go home and recharge and have some downtime. Oh, I love it. I said, what's something that's inspired you about Jason and his speaking that has blessed your life or your family?
Oh, geez, these are crazy questions, Connie. You're catching me off guard here.
This is so good.
What's inspired?
I'm seeing if I can get you speechless.
Yeah, I would probably imagine it would come down to how much service we do. I mean, I would hope that that's where it would have gone with her answer.
Exactly. You two are like two peas in a pod, this dynamic duo. She said, he has always given back so much of his time and talents. I know that we have been blessed immensely by his service to others. You are both on the same wavelength. And I have to mention, we got to talk really quickly about that YouTube video. So you did a post and you did a video, I understand, it just went viral. You shared about, you said, I saw my wife at Target today. So what was your thoughts on that? Because did you even think that it was going to go so big as it did?
Here's what's funny about it, Connie. I do wish it was a YouTube video. It was actually just something I wrote on Facebook. And eventually people started posting it on YouTube and so forth. But when I wrote about this, it was just a night after I had seen my wife at the Target store. And I made a little joke that, I saw her and didn't know she was there. We had gone in separate cars. I was on my way out of town. She was just at the store, and I saw this beautiful blonde and I was like, wow, she is so beautiful. And then I realized that was Tammy, my wife. So I wrote a funny post saying, I hate to admit this, but I think I cheated on my wife today with my wife. Let me explain. In other words, falling in love with somebody you see in the distance, not realizing it's the one you already love. And this post went crazy. This was in 2015. And it was the #1 story in the world for 72 hours. And I was the top trending name in the world for those 3 days. It was pretty nuts because people like Kim Kardashian having a baby, and I'm trending higher than her name because of this love story of falling in love with your wife again. Although I never fell out of love, this was just a way to say, do we appreciate and fall in love with the person that we see every single day? And that was really the birth of the promise, to say, what's your promise to your family, to your spouse, to yourself, to your God? And so it became really something that was uncontrollable. It's been amazing. It was the top story in Brazil, Australia, China, India. I mean, the stuff we got was nuts, and people came out of the woodwork to claim they were my cousin, and it was hilarious. But
Won't
yeah,
do. I read the post and it was so tender. And one of my favorite parts was just, you didn't even tell her that you were a couple of people behind her. You just watched her and you were just, it was so tender because you were struck anew by that fresh view of seeing her that way. And I love how you talked about appreciating her independent spirit. And she wasn't even noticing some guy in a beard that was lurking behind and watching her, right? She was so focused and doing her thing and this gorgeousness about her that you just had that moment of, oh my gosh, I'm the luckiest man to be able to have her. And she had no idea, which I just think is so tender. And again, just to bring it back to this theme and this thread that when you do it this way, all of those things that you actually want and yearn for are now yours. You have this relationship with this wonderful, beautiful wife, and you two are truly that dynamic duo. And you have your beautiful children that do normal children things. It's not like it's all Pollyanna, but just you have all the pieces that back when you were 25, looking ahead and saying, this is what we want, this is what we're yearning. And here it is. And now it's just deeper and broader. And you're just having those concentric circles of success and joy and love. And it just keeps perpetuating. It's absolutely gorgeous.
let me just throw this out there. I know we got to wrap up, but here's what's interesting to me is that I spent the beginning of my career making a living impersonating other people and doing a different voice. And Heavenly Father knows our voice. He knows our name. He loves us. And we're here for a reason. And it's not to say that I've put off doing those other voices because it's fun, but to share my one voice, not my silly faces, not being just some goofball, but to profoundly proclaim my love for my wife. And that's the thing that goes viral. I found it so fascinating that that was the truth. And I think that as we step into that truth and we're willing to share authentically who we are and authentically go with our voice, even if we're good at mimicking others or trying to be like somebody else, it's so hard now on social media. We are comparing ourselves. We are frustrated with what's going on in our lives. And if we can just say, I know because I am a child of God, I have the Spirit. I have within me what would need to be shared for the world. And I think every single one of us has that opportunity to share our signature moves, our promise that only we can share. And it's important to open our mouth and share it with the world.
Absolutely perfectly said. And I can't help but think you could not have imagined years ago that you would have written a post that would have had that kind of impact. And look at what was waiting ahead as you made those choices and those decisions and keep trusting that path. As we wrap up, I could talk to you for 2 hours, solid, kind of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and we're good. But I just would love to know, for those people listening, and especially speakers, is there one last bit of advice? You've given so much great stuff today. Is there one last bit of advice that either you were given or that you've learned along the way that's been kind of a touchstone for you, whether it's a spiritual principle or just something that's helped you stay grounded? Is there anything that comes to mind, a spiritual principle or tool or something that has just helped you just stay on that path when you've been kind of at those switch points?
Well, great question. I would say the foundational principles of what we believe should be within your message. And so as a speaker, figuring out a way that you can share what you believe while still being able to get hired and share wherever you're going to be, that's a very important thing, because otherwise you'll be speaking on something perhaps that you wish you could be saying instead. And so making sure that every single day you wake up and say, this is the direction I'm headed. This is why I'm doing this. And for a lot of us, it might just be opening the scriptures and saying, oh yeah, I'm doing this because I follow Christ. I'm doing this because here I am reading the New Testament and I'm going, I want to be a rebel just like Jesus was, because I want to shake things up. I want to make a difference in this world, because the best way that I can do that is to share what comes through me, through the gospel, through the Spirit. I'm going to share it, and I'm going to shake things up. I think that's an important thing for us to believe that we can do and that we should do. If we're not doing that, we're too vanilla, and vanilla is good, but sometimes we need some sprinkles on there. And whatever that looks like for you, while still keeping the foundational principles of the gospel and within your life, that's what you need to share. And I hope that you're more courageous today because I've shared that I've done some of that as well.
And look how it's turned out with all the ups and downs and in betweens. And you have found that way to be signature in what you're doing, having a prayer in a Vegas style green room, right? Being able to do those moments and see them for those opportunities, that it isn't just about this thing I'm doing. It's about how can he use me as a more effective instrument. Jason, this has been pure joy today. Thank you so much. For those listening and want more, where can they best reach you?
I play a lot on LinkedIn now, and LinkedIn is a great spot. I'm also on Instagram. And I post everywhere, but I am looking to make more influence on YouTube and stuff like that. JasonHewlett.com is my website. But the thing I would think your listeners would like the best of mine is I wrote a book called The Promise to the One, which is the promise to yourself. But if you go to Amazon and you click on the Audible version of it, that's me performing the book. And it's so fun. I've got so many great comments about it. And it's really helped a lot of people in their lives to say, I know what my promise is. I know how I can keep it better now. And so if anything, I would say, go grab that book and listen to it and believe that you too have a promise to share with the world and to keep. And if you'll do that, Heavenly Father will certainly say at the end of your time, hey, you did a good job. You shared your talents. And that's what you were meant to go find them and share them. And you made the world a better place. And that's how we keep the promise.
I love it. I was thinking, well done, thou good and faithful servant. And then I thought about my 17-year-old that she would say, you slayed. I love it. Thank you so much, Jason. So appreciate you being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
This was so beautiful and fun. And if you enjoyed it, please go below, rate, review, and subscribe. And check out our other interviews that are just as compelling. We have Steve Young, Jane Clayson Johnson. We have so many guests who are all sitting here sharing their life experiences, wisdom, and tips to be able to help you take your next step in being called to create.